This is Jamie with Stonemeyer Games, and for today's Sunday sit-down video, I'm going to talk about my favorite cooperative games that discourage or outright prevent quarterbacking or alpha players. This is a common complaint about cooperative games, that sometimes there can be one player or a couple players who kind of just steer the game for everybody else. And so I wanted to look at games that are designed around preventing that concept and are still a lot of fun, because sometimes I think designs can go a little bit too far in trying to prevent this. I'll talk about that on a game-by-game basis as I go through this list. Some games that won't appear on this list because they're honorable mentions, they're close, or I haven't played them, are Mental Blocks, Dead of Winter, really close call with one other game on this list, Magic Maze, The Crew, Gloomhaven, Marvel Champions, and Space Team. So let's jump in and go right to the top 10. Oh, and yeah, Dead of Winter almost made the list, but instead I picked Forgotten Waters. Not that the games are all that similar, but I guess they are from the same company, coincidentally. But yeah, Forgotten Waters is a cooperative pirate game where it's designed for 3 to 7 players, can go on an adventure in this giant storybook that's really cool storybook. I have a video about this game, awesome game. And it does a few things to prevent quarterbacking. One, there's a phase in each round or each turn of the game where players take turns under time pressure selecting the action they're going to take that round. They don't read all the details about that action. They just look at, okay, the core element of that action, and they put their player token on it. Or if you're playing, you might have multiple characters that you're controlling. You might put multiple characters out there in character order. So you have this time pressure. You don't really have time to discuss it. You have a little bit of time, but not a ton. And so that helps prevent the quarterbacking problem. There's also randomness in this game. There are times where you need to randomize something to determine the outcome of a skill test, and randomness or luck is a way to prevent some element of quarterbacking, not necessarily decision making, but the outcomes are not under all of the players' control because there's a luck element to it. And also, you'll see this come up throughout this list, there's agency in this game. In Forgotten Waters, you are the one placing your character on an action. You are the one that's going to make a decision within that action. No matter what another player says to you, you are the one that actually gets to make that decision. Yes, that does carry over potentially to all cooperative games, that essentially one player could, or each players do get to make their own decision. But I think it's more evident when you're actually like putting a token somewhere, because it's you that has to actually move that token no matter what other players are saying. And because there are multiple levels of that decision point here, you're putting a character out and then you're deciding within an action what you're going to do. That provides agency and prevents quarterbacking. That's Forgotten Waters. I should say on this list that there are not a lot. There are a lot of like lighter games on this list, because I think they might they do something with information. I think that is a little bit easier to do in a lighter game than a heavier game. That isn't the case though with number 9. Number 9 is Spirit Island. In Spirit Island, it's a game where you are controlling, each player controls a very asymmetric spirit, and they are trying to prevent settlers from colonizing an island. And in Spirit Island, 2 elements kind of tie together to prevent quarterbacking, and they are complexity and asymmetry. Each of the spirits is very different, and the complexity around those spirits is so high that you really don't have enough brain power to control multiple spirits. That you have enough brain power and time to collaborate and talk with other players, but to actually say, okay, you're going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'll do this. You can't direct players in that way because there's too much information in front of each player. It just and also there's simultaneous play. You're making all these decisions at the same time. So that's where the collaboration comes from. But it's just too much information for any one player to have or control. That might be different for very experienced Spirit Island players. But even then, there's so many different cards for each asymmetric spirit that I think it would be pretty difficult. So that's one way that, or 2 ways that Spirit Island combats quarterbacking: complexity and asymmetry and how they interact with each other. That's my number 9 favorite cooperative game that prevents quarterbacking, Spirit Island. My number 8 favorite game in this category is the now classic Hanabi. And this is the first on this list of games where the information itself, where the game is designed around a limited information. And this is, I think, why we'll see a lot of games on this list like this, because when the game is designed around limited information, in Hanabi that means that you can't see your own hand of cards. You can only see the cards in other players' hands. That restricts your ability to tell other players what to do because you don't have all the information. And even in Hanabi, when players are making decisions about like what I'm going to do on my turn, am I going to give someone a clue or not? Other players, the game is designed around the concept that other players can't chime in because they don't know what's in their hand, and so they're not allowed to give up that information. I want to differentiate this idea of limited information from games that artificially impose that. I'll use the classic of Pandemic here. In Pandemic, you have some cards in your hand, but the game tells you that you're not supposed to play open-handed, except in Pandemic Legacy, where I think you are supposed to play open-handed. But it's an artificial construct. The game is the same either way, if you play open-handed or not, other than the fact that the game is saying artificially you need to restrict that information. In Hanabi, it wouldn't be, basically the guideline here is Hanabi wouldn't be a game without limited information. If everyone could see everyone else's hands, you would not have a game there. You would be able to solve it easily without any problems. So if the game is designed around the concept of limited information, I think that is very different than a game that just artificially says, oh, you can't talk about this or you can't share this. That's Hanabi, my number 8, the first of limited information games on this list. Number 7 is uses a different technique, Shadows over Camelot. This is the only game on this list that has a trader. Dead of Winter also was very close to this. I really love what Dead of Winter does, but I love the theme and almost the simplicity of Shadows over Camelot a little bit more than Dead of Winter. In Shadows over Camelot, you are knights at the round table trying to save Camelot, and amongst you might be a traitor. You don't know for sure. There might be, there might not be, and that traitor. As you go about doing the various tasks in the kingdom, the traitor might try to impede those tasks, and they're trying to be sneaky about it, so that other players, so the other players can't win. And this traitor mechanism prevents quarterbacking, because even if one player is telling everyone else what to do, everyone might doubt their intentions because they might be the traitor, or if there is a traitor in amongst the players, an alpha player who's trying to direct players to tell them what to do, there's another reason for players through the traitor mechanism to not necessarily listen to that person, to the quarterback or the alpha player. So I think the traitor mechanism is a clever way in cooperative games of preventing this quarterbacking problem. That's Shadows over Camelot, my number 7 game on this list. My number 6 game that prevents quarterbacking does so in another really uniquely clever way, and that is Flip Ships. Flip Ships is a dexterity game, so this uses dexterity to prevent a player from quarterbacking, because even if one player says you should aim for that ship, that's totally fine for them to say. I think that's actually good for players to collaborate in that way and say, hey, aim for this. But when it comes down to it, I am flicking a cardboard token across the table, and even I don't have that much control over it, so much less another player telling me where I should flick it. So a dexterity element, a challenging dexterity element, can really prevent that alpha player problem or that quarterbacking problem, simply because there is a randomness, an element of chance, and an element of dexterous skill to it that other players can't control when I'm the one doing the flicking. So that's why Flip Ships is my number 6 game on this list. My number 5 game, we're in the top 5 now. My number 5 favorite cooperative game that prevents the quarterbacking problem is Mechs versus Minions. A friend has my copy right now, so I won't hold it up. But Mechs versus Minions is a programming game where players are programming little mechs to go out and solve problems on a map in kind of a campaign format. And it does something really, really cool where that ties a little bit to Spirit Island, where my board and the programming of my mechs ends up being so different than the other players that that it's very difficult for one player to just tell everyone what to do. There's just too much information to handle. And there's the programming element and the chaos that emerges from that programming element as we are trying to collaborate and make sure our mechs move in the right way to attack the minions and deter the minions. But because of the programming, the chaos created by the programming, we don't really know exactly what's going to happen. And so there's kind of incomplete information just simply because of the complexity and because of the programming and because of the chaos. All that adds up, I think, to prevent quarterbacking. And I think it's a great way. I think programming is well, programming, I don't typically gravitate towards competitive programming games. In the competitive or in the cooperative atmosphere where chaos is a little fun or can be fun, and you experience that chaos together, I think that works really well. That's why Mechs vs. Minions is my number 5 game on this list. My number 4 game is a game I really love. I should own it, but I don't, and that is Mysterium. Mysterium is a game where one player is dead. They are a ghost that is trying to communicate to the other players, the investigators, how they died. Kind of like Clue, like who did it, what weapon did they use, and where did it happen in a mansion setting. And so there are a couple things that Mysterium does. One is that thematically the ghosts can't talk to the other players. They have to communicate by giving clues, which are cards with art on them that are communicating through the player's dreams what happened. And so there's a really nice asymmetry of information there, and silence, basically, where the ghost can't talk to the other players because thematically it doesn't make sense. The ghost could just outright say what's happening. The game is designed, again, similar to Hanabi, the game is designed around the idea of this limited information, and it works perfectly with a theme. The other element that I think Mysterium does really well to prevent this is the agency, again, of each player being able to place their own token somewhere. So even if you disagree with what with how I'm interpreting the dreams that the ghost is sending to me, I am the one that gets to put my token out on the board. No other player can actually control that token. And so that agency of actually putting the token out there, I think, makes a big difference rather than having it be a collective decision. I can talk to other players, I can get their opinions, but I'm the one that gets to place that token. So those two things, I think the agency plus the asymmetric and limited information, the silence, all those add up to making Mysterium a game that doesn't have much quarterbacking at all, and that's why it is my number 4 game on this list. My number 3 favorite cooperative game that prevents quarterbacking is The Mind. The Mind, again, is a very light game. All you're trying to do is play numbers in ascending order and sequentially in ascending order. And it's a game, again, it's a game designed around the idea that players cannot communicate. You are syncing up with each other and trying to play these cards in the right order. My hand is secret to me, known only to me. Other players don't have that information. And the whole game hinges on this. If players could just openly talk, The Mind wouldn't be a game, because I would just say, okay, guys, I have a 5, a 13, and a 20 in my hand. What do you all have? The game would not function without that element of silence and limited communication and limited information. I know what's in my hand. I don't know what's in your hand. So I think The Mind is brilliantly designed around this concept, around limited information and preventing quarterbacking because of that limited information and our limited ability to express that information to each other. That's why that's why The Mind is my number 3 game on this list. My number 2 favorite game, cooperative game that prevents quarterbacking, is the Shipwreck Arcana. This might be the least known game on this list, but it is a fantastic cooperative game. It's a deduction game where players take turns having different information than other players. It's a little tough to describe. I'd recommend watching a video about it. But basically, each player is going to have, there are different numbers that a player will draw. I believe they're 1 through 6. Yeah, maybe 1 through 7. I'm going to draw a few random numbers, and I'm going to choose one of those numbers that's the number that all the other players have to guess. And the other number I will use as a clue on several different cards on the table that present different requirements, different clues. And so let's find an example of this. I think it'll be easier to explain. So here's a clue that says even. If the sum of your fates is even, fates are the little number tokens, play one of them here. So say I have a 5 and a 6 in my hand. I keep the, oh no, that actually doesn't work. Say I have a 5 and a 3 here. So the sum of my fates is even. 5 plus 3 is 8. I keep the 5 in my hand, and I would put the 3 on this card to communicate to the other players that the other number that I have, the 5, which they don't know, the 3 plus whatever that number is adds up to an even number. So I'm communicating this clue based on limited information, and other players have to do their best based on the clue that I give and the number that I put on that clue to determine the number that I actually have in my hand. Sometimes that takes multiple turns. And while this is happening, each player is doing this. Each player is taking turns having that limited information and giving clues to the other players. So it's not just like in Mysterium, one player is the ghost for the entire game. It's a little different in the Shipwreck Arcana because each player is taking turns having that information, giving clues, participating in the clues, and participating in the guessing process. So I think this game does a great job of preventing quarterbacking. Because of that limited information and the clue giving process. And that is why the Shipwreck Arcana is one of my favorite games, cooperative games that prevent quarterbacking, my number 2 game on this list. My number 1 game has quickly become a classic. I've played this game dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and that is JustOne. JustOne is another game with limited information built into the game. It is the entire game. Without it, it wouldn't be a game. Because in JustOne, I draw a random card, I show it to the other players, and I name a number, and that number corresponds with a clue on that card. Say the clue is Shakespeare. I don't know what that clue is. All the other players know it, and they need to each write down a one-word clue that will help me guess that the word is Shakespeare. However, the players can't communicate during that phase because one of the rules of the game is if multiple players write down the same clue, so if multiple players write down Hamlet, when they reveal that clue to the other players, before me, the person who's trying to guess, gets to see those clues, if more than one Hamlet shows up, those clues go face down, and I don't get to see those clues when I'm trying to guess that the word is Shakespeare from the remaining clues that are out there. So it's a game built on limited information, both based on the person who's trying to guess and the players who are giving the clues. The whole game is built around this concept. This game works wonderfully over Zoom. That's one of the reasons why I've played it so much, or works well remotely over camera. And it's super easy to teach and play. And I love that it's a party game that scales up really well, but that is fully cooperative. We're not competing against one another, which is not always the spirit that I want when I'm in a gathering or at a party. So I think JustOne works wonderfully in that format. It's a limited information game built around the idea of no quarterbacking. I love that. Yeah, that's number 1. JustOne is my number 1 game on this list. As you can see, a number of the games have limited information, and they are simpler games. I think that works really, really well. One of the reasons that this has been on my mind a lot lately is because my cooperative game, my open world cooperative game, also uses limited information in a very important thematic way. I won't talk about that for a while until the game is released, but it's been kind of the crux of the game that there is an element of limited information that makes sense thematically in the world of the game that prevents quarterbacking and creates a unique, fun experience. The last question I kind of wanted to pose to you with, other than what are your favorite cooperative games that prevent quarterbacking, is do you think that that it is a player problem in a cooperative game when there's quarterbacking, or is it a design problem? I created this list because I think I wanted to demonstrate that it is at least partially a design problem. There are ways to design cooperative games that just outright prevent quarterbacking because of what the game does, and often what the game does in a very unique way to limit information between players, or to have traders, or to have complexity and asymmetry, all these different things, to have limited time. There are games like Magic Maze where there's limited time to do things. Like Escape is another game that has where time is very frantic. You're rolling dice at the same time. There's luck. There's limited time. So I think these games demonstrate that it is possible to design cooperative games that prevent quarterbacking. But in those that don't, is it more of is it also a player problem when you do have a player at the table who is just telling everyone else what to do? Is that at least partially a player problem? I would say yes, that it is. Where if I sat down to play, say, Pandemic with other players, and one player just took over for all the other players, to me, I mean, that's at least partially a player problem. I think Pandemic is a very good game, and I don't think, and it might be a worse game if there were limited information in it. And so I would rather have the ability and the opportunities to play a great cooperative game like Pandemic without the fear that one of the players will just take over for all the other players, in which case I think it does become more of a player problem. But I'm curious what you think about this. And I don't think there's necessarily a definitive answer. I think it can depend on the game. But I'm curious if you think that if it's always just a designer problem, or if it is at least partially a player problem when one player does decide to quarterback and become an alpha player in the cooperative scenario. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, as well as your favorite cooperative games that do prevent quarterbacking through these various methods. I definitely look forward to the discussion in the comments below. Thanks.